It's in Russian, but I
Настя, вы
think it's
покажите аудиторию Лауре. Скажите, кто присутствует тоже.
Okay, so can I start?
Yes, please.
Perfect. So you stop me if you don't listen to me properly, okay? So Kant and Natorp on intuition. So today I wanted to share with you a topic that I have been investigating for a while, that is the relationship between concepts and intuitions, and the way in which Kant and Natorp have different views of how to relate the conceptual representations with singular representations. This problem that I'm dealing with is at a certain point comparable to the way in which we can think the relationship between universal representations and singularity. So that is like the topic that I would like to address in general. How can we relate universal representations to singular representations? So introduction. In his letter to Marcus Hertz on February 21, 1772, Kant introduces the general problem of knowledge by the following question. On what foundation rests the relationship of what we call representation in us with the objects? According to Kant, it is necessary to justify how the human mind represents objects. And more specifically, the problem is how our thinking can legitimately be related to what it represents. In his letter, Kant argues that one of the main tasks of philosophy is to explain how thinking can have a reference to objects. The Kantian answer to this question is that thinking requires two types of representations, intuitions and concepts. The intuition is a singular representation, and the concept is universal representation. Concepts abstract the marks that many objects have in common, while intuition refers to singular things. Our thinking can relate to objects only through intuition because singular things are completely determined. There can be determinate cognitions only as intuitions and not as concepts. In relation to intuition, the logical determination can be complete, but in regard to concepts, it can never be fully achieved. In conceptual representation, the complete determination can never be accomplished. Concepts are, per definitionem, abstractive representations. For this reason, the possible reference of thinking to the fully determined individual requires intuition. According to Kant, intuitions are given, while concepts are products of our understanding. Thus, if our understanding produces only universal representations, concepts, how can it legitimately be related to singular objects? Or in another way, if our intellect knows things only through concepts, universal representations, how does it know singular things? So this is like the core of the problem. This is like the central question that it must be answered. If to know is to produce universal representations, how can we have a legitimate relation to singularity? Well, the Kantian answer to this question comes along with the distinction between intuition and concepts. The Kantian answer to this question rests in the distinction between intuition and concepts. In the transcendental aesthetic, Kant introduces these fundamental distinctions of critical idealism. Sensibility provides intuitions, while the understanding is the source of concepts. This differentiation between intuition and concepts as two different products of heterogeneous faculties introduced in the very beginning of the critique is the pillar upon the critical philosophy rests. In the arguments developed in the transcendental aesthetic, Kant uses the definition of the notion of intuition and concept as premises for his arguments. Through intuition, thinking can have an immediate reference to objects. The intuitions are provided by sensibility, which is the capacity to be affected. The sensibility is the faculty of receptivity by which we receive representations. According to the first lines of the transcendental aesthetic, the objects affect our minds and provide us with intuition. In contrast to intuition, concepts are a product of understanding. The understanding, by its own means, generates concepts. Through intuitions, the objects are given. Through the understanding, the objects are thought. The mind is affected and receives the matter for the formation of representations. Thus, the sensibility as receptivity provide us with intuitions. Scholars agree that in these first passages of the aesthetic, Kant is providing a series of definitions. Commentators consider that these statements are not conclusions of any other previous argument provided by Kant in the sections of the Critique of Pure Reasons. In effect, this exegetical tradition may differ in detail of their interpretation. However, for all of them, there is not really an argumentative structure in these first passages. For this reason, the distinction between intuition and concepts can be considered as one of the weakest points in the Kantian system. The Kantian dichotomies introduced in the first section of the Critique of Pure Reasons have strongly been questioned by various contemporary scholars, and different philosophical schools have developed their own systems in an attempt to overcome this dualism. So as to put it briefly, in order to have knowledge, so as to answer the question that we put in the very beginning, how can we, by universal representations, have access to singularity? Kant's answer to this question is by dividing two types of representations, concepts and intuitions. However, according to the Kantian system, according to Kantian idealism, there is something that the mind, that the understanding, to be more precisely, cannot produce by itself. Understanding can produce concepts. However, understanding cannot produce neither the form of sensibility, space and time, nor what is given. So as to put in another way, the understanding depends on something different from itself so as to construct experience. It depends on intuition in both senses, on the sense that it depends on the form of sensibility, and in the sense that it depends on something given to thinking. Or, in another way, thinking cannot construct singularity. Modern neo-Kantianism proposes as one of the pillars of their return to Kant a new approach to the dualism between intuition and concepts. One of the main goals of the neo-Kantian Marvel School is to overcome this Kantian dualism between intuition and concepts. While for Kant, intuition and concepts have their origin in different faculties of the human mind, intuition in sensibility, concepts in understanding, modern neo-Kantianism redefined this notion as modes of thinking. According to Paul Natorp, one of the founders of the school, the conception according to which the object is determined by two factors, intuition and concepts, is an assumption inherited from Aristotelian realism. The position that affirms that there are determination of the object that thinking cannot provide by its own means is an inheritance from Aristotelian metaphysics. For Natorp, Plato would have been the first to demonstrate that thinking is not dependent on objects. On the contrary, objects are dependent on thinking. In this sense, Plato was the first idealistic philosopher. Aristotle gave a realistic interpretation of the theory of ideas found from the spirit of the theory of Plato. The debate between Plato and Aristotle is the controversy between idealism, and realism is, as Christian Klein holds, the real antagonist of neo-Kantianism. Natorp considers that the idealism of René Descartes tried to overcome the dualism between intuition and concepts, and Kant followed this line. However, neither Descartes nor Kant were deep enough in their approaches. After all, claims Natorp, and I quote, Descartes fell into a gross dualism too, end of the quote. Even in the Cartesian idealist philosophy, there is always an element of experience that thinking cannot provide from its own sources. The object is an strange element for knowledge. Cartesian idealism recovers the task begun by Plato. However, in the system of Descartes, the naive belief in the existence of the object, which exists in itself before all knowledge and to be grasped by the mind, remains unchanged. The overcoming of dualism between intuition and concept was not carried out either by Descartes or by Kant. Kantian idealism, according to Natorp, failed to show the way in which thinking is the producer of objectivity. So, the task of developing a coherent idealism remains. The position of Natorp is twofold. On one hand, he claimed that it is necessary to overcome the heterogeneity between intuition and concept introduced by Kant. On the other hand, he considered that it must be shown the role of intuition plays in the process of thinking. According to him, philosophers failed in accomplishing this task. The philosophical efforts of his contemporaries to overcome this dualism were infertile, since they were grounded on the basis of the Kantian error, which ultimately was rooted on the Aristotelian naive realism. The attempt of these contemporaries to overcome the dichotomy where intuition and concepts were fruitless. Thus, the problem of how a cognition may refer to objects is introduced in concomitance with the possibility of accomplishing a genuine idealism. A coherent idealism can only be achieved by exhibiting the way in which thinking can be the source of objectivity, even in its concreteness. So, as to put it briefly, it has to be shown not only how the mind, how understanding creates the form of object, but also how can the understanding create the object in its singularity. The Kantian approach of how thinking can refer to objects must be reformulated in terms of how thinking can produce the object in its singularity. This is like the main challenge. The problem of the determination of the singular object is introduced, therefore, in the problem of the possibility of prosecution of a genuine idealism, because let's recall that the relation to the given, the relationship to something external to thought, according to Natorp, it's something proper of realism. So a genuine idealism must show how the singularity of the object can be created by thought itself. So in this context of the problem, the goal of my research is to analyze Natorp's through the definition of the distinction between intuition and concepts, and particularly in relation to his conception of the method of philosophy. I would like to exhibit the connection between the way in which Natorp defines the Kantian dichotomy and his conception of the method of philosophy. We will show how a new position regarding the problem of method led us to a new conception of the way in which thinking relates to objects in its singularity. We will argue that the question of how cognition may refer to the object requires rethinking the method of philosophy. It will be shown that the question of how thinking can have reference to objects was badly posed. The question is how the understanding can be the source of objectivity and not how it relates to objects. We will study the arguments that led Natorp to argue that the object is the result of a construction of understanding. This is the only approach to the problem consistent with critical idealism. So first part, the Kantian conception, introduction to the distinction. I will skip this part, but let us recall the role that intuition played in the construction of experience for Kant. And to put it very, very briefly, we can claim that it has two main functions. On the one hand, we have the form of intuition, which are space and time, which the understanding cannot produce. So when understanding can have access to experience, when understanding wants to know things, it must have resonance to something external to itself, which first of all is space and time as a form of sensibility, as something that it cannot produce. But on the other hand, too, understanding, to know, not only to think, but to know, must have a reference to something given, to a matter which it cannot produce by itself. Therefore, according to the Kantian conception, then the process of knowledge requires not only the functions of the understanding, the concept, but also a reference to the form of intuition on the first hand, and also to something given to intuition. Therefore, as a conclusion, the singularity, according to the Kantian conception, can only be reached by something which is alien to thinking. That is to say, by intuition, in the sense that it requires space and time as a form of intuition, but also as it requires reference to the given. Natorp, as I was saying, challenges this way to solve the problem. First of all, because according to him, a coherent idealism must show how thinking can, by its own means, can have access to objects in its concreteness. So therefore, it must be shown not only how thinking has functions, as Kant thought, but also how these functions can reach singularity. Natorp, so as to show this, Natorp develops a deduction of categories. I won't develop it in here, but I have a very peculiar way of reading Natorp's conception. In my opinion, Natorp develops a deduction of category starting from the principle of correlation, and I would like to show this. I would like to show you this, how Natorp shows By the deduction of categories, how can thinking construct not only the form of experience, but also the objects of experience? So, the deduction of categories, the levels of quantity and quality. As Kant had, Natorp develops his deduction of categories in 4 stages: quantity, quality, relation, and modality. According to Natorp, the fundamental act of thinking consists in correlating. That is very Kantian. The act of the synthetic unity requires 3 fundamental moments: unity, plurality, and totality. When we claim that the concept A contains the elements x1, x2, x3, etc., we assume the 3 moments: the unity, the plurality, and the unity in a totality. The number is a scientific expression of this natural operation of thinking that includes these 3 moments: the setting of the numerical 1, the establishment of the unlimited plurality, and the generation of the determined plurality of the totality. However, the categories of quantity are insufficient to guarantee a differentiated objectification. The functions of the quality categories that objectify the sensation are required to conform the object. This function is intended to distinguish one thing from another in order to understand it from a higher point of view, from a comprehensive unity. Quality is the synthetic function of unity that provides a central understanding and original unity. The synthetic function has, as in quantitative synthesis, 3 differentiable moments. First, a plurality of differentiation is put on the basis of the qualitative identity. In the same way as with a numerical unity, in this case, the identity is the first basis, regardless of what is considered as the identity one. However, an allusion to an alterity is inevitable found in every identity judgment. The this something can only be defined in relation to another something, and the other something can only be defined in relation to a this. Both terms are required by the comparison. There must be at least one differentiation characteristic that establishes the one with respect to the other. This is the basis of the identity position series. However, there must be a third moment where what was separated is reunified from a point of view under a higher unity of understanding. This point of view is required by thought as the form which is compared. In this way, the qualitative function represents the synthetic unity of diversity on which the genus is grounded. Genus is the logical name from this qualitative unity of uniformity, of diversity. The quality, as a production of the diverse from the unity, sets the condition from the exercise of the quantitative function, that is to say, homogeneity. The establishment of something liable to numbering occurs thanks to the qualitative function that gives something differentiable that can be measured by number. The constitution of the object in general is made by the correlation between the qualitative and the quantitative synthesis. So up to this point, we have something very close to the Kantian deduction, not analogous, but close, in the sense that we have here the constitution, so as to put, of the object in general, the object of thinking, as a magnitude. Quantitative on the one hand, so we have here this totality, this synthetic totality, this compositive totality that we call quantity, but also we have the quality, the what is something, the what for Kant was also related to the concept sensation, and here is defined in terms of the determination of what is this in relation to what is the other thing. So we have here, according to Natorp, the constitution of the object in general. However, so the categories of quantity and quality, this will be the results, according to Natorp. The functions of the categories of quantity and quality determine object as a magnitude. Natorp exhibits that the object as an object of thinking is already completely created, but thinking itself in the categories of quantity and quality. The quantitative and qualitative determinations, according to Natorp, were capable of constructing objectivity in these most general determinations. Natorp argues that one could be easily led to conclude that the further moment is not necessary, as it was already exhibited how the object of thinking can be created by thinking alone. However, the task is the constitution of experience, and experience is more than a single object. For this reason, the constitution of the isolated object is not enough for our purposes. That is to say, to explain how objectivity can be constituted purely conceptually. The determination of the object in general is insufficient. Experience exists the determination of quantity and quality. To construct experience, it is necessary not only to determine the object, but also to connect the objects. Concomitantly, to know is precisely to put objects in relation. To know is not to determine an object, but to establish the relation among them. For this reason, it is necessary to have another level of determination. The object created by thinking must be related to other objects. It must be shown how the object can be put into relationships with other objects. Now, it is necessary to establish a system of objects. It must be guaranteed the possibility of an interconnection of objects. For this reason, it is necessary to have another level, the level of relation. In the level of relation, it must be established the conditions of possibility of interconnection among objects. At this point, the constitution of the plurality of objects and the relations among them is required. Natorp must show how thinking can determine not only objects, but the system of objects. It must be guaranteed the condition of the possibility of the relations of objects among themselves. Thus, thinking seeks every time higher levels of relations to accomplish what was posited as a task, the constitution of experience. The method demanding that the determinations cannot be considered as if they were given. On the contrary, it must be shown how they are produced. On these grounds, a further level is required. Thinking must generate the system that enables the interconnection of these systems, guaranteed by quantity and quality among themselves. The synthetics of quantity and quality gave us a multiplicity of series. The simple system generated by the first level is insufficient. The second order of the relation will not be just a synthesis, but a system of synthesis. Indeed, every act of thinking can be conceived as a way of relating. To think is to relate. To relate is the fundamental action of thinking. That is according to Natorp, but also according to Kant. To synthesize, to relate, is what thinking does. However, the general mode of relating present in every act of thinking must be distinguished from this determinate action of relating that enables the interconnection of the series of magnitude generated by the process of quantity and quality. So as to put it very briefly, we have the constitution of the object as a magnitude, as the object in general, by quantity and quality, and now by the process of relationship, we have the relationships among these objects. So thinking now in this third stage takes as a starting point the moment generated. It does not depart from any given factum to conform the object. Rather, it departs from its own creations. These determinations can only come from thinking. The relation present in interconnection of objects is interconnection according to law. The determined connection, the act of determining according to the relation, is expressed in the law. The law is the expression of the determination of the connection. Quantitative and qualitative synthesis left a system of order. The order of the determined series is now required to generate a total order. The result of this total order will be nature. Nature is the system of interconnected law. This interconnection can be called function mathematically or law in connection with nature. The connection according to law will allow articulating each separate series into a system of series. It is a demand of thinking that this generating system is not left undetermined. It must be connected into a high order. Each qualitative series must be incorporated into the total order under its subsumption to a law expressed in the function. The process of thinking itself demands that nothing remains undetermined, and then that every series can be connected with any other. The law expresses the necessary connection of any term with other by conditionally indicating that if one condition is met, another necessarily follows, if A, then B. Through this connection, the function generates a new superior concatenation. This requirement is a total ordering, a requirement that remains as a regulatory idea for thinking in each of the progression of its actions. As Natorp already showed, it belongs to the essence of thinking that this process can never be exhausted. For a limited cognition of ours, a finite cognition, the accomplishment of a complete determination of experience is a demand that can never be fully accomplished. The final objective of this act of relating is a totality in which each part of the particular series can relate to another in the conformation of a system. The law is the expression of this connection. What is sought is the total connection, concatenation of the particular laws in a total system. This is the guiding idea of thinking, articulating a coherent order system. This is the requirement of thinking, the demand for unity. In this progression, thinking aspires to generate a higher order units. The demand for unity is the guiding idea of the progression of thinking, that is to say, searching for every time higher stages of unity. This concept of the total order will be the way in which a coherent total order of the various system is established. So, the starting point of this moment of relation is thought taking created in itself. The terms of relation are generated by thinking. In this case, the starting point is, as we said, the object as a magnitude, the object in general created not as something given, but something produced by thought itself. The relationship will also have three moments: an initial position, a continuation of the position of the closure. So let's recall that for the quantity process, we have the position of the unity, the position of the plurality, the unity, the unity, another unity, and the closure in the totality. And the same we have for the quality process. Here again, we have, according to Natorp, three stages. A first stage, that is the substantiality, a third stage, that is the causality, and a final stage, that is the community. As we can see, it is the same, the names at least are the same as in the Kantian conception. The initial act consists in the position of the Grundreiche, established by thinking. This is the equivalent to the Kantian category of substance. As the unit was for the first moment of quantity and the identity for quality, the Grundreiche is the first moment as the unit to be connected. So the Grundreiche was the product, so as to put it, of quantity and quality. Now we have this as the first individual. It is the ground for the possible relation. Natorp called this fundamentum relationis. The first moment consists of the establishment of a reference system that allows the series to be articulated with each other. This will be the fundamental series. The various relationship series will be possible under this common reference to the basic series. The first requirement is establishment of a system of position, of a scale in which the various interconnected series of variables can be articulated. Natorp recognizes a coincidence with the Aristotelian position. Indeed, as Aristotle noted, it is necessary to establish a subject that is invariant in relation to determination. A subject must be established with respect to which these determinations are taken as axioms. The possibility of a dynamic system of connection demands the establishment of something constant. Any possibility of determining the change would be lost if nothing could be established as constant. Thinking demands the invariance in respect of which every change can be determined. However, this is only a logical requirement, not something really permanent given to thinking. The fundamental series is not a thing but a process. Aristotelian naive realism confuses a logical requirement with the postulation of the entity, the substance. This is the mistake of naive realism. Thinking requires taking something as invariant, but invariant is only provisionally determined by virtue of this requirement. It is not something given to thinking, but a logical demand. This demand can only be satisfied. I'm lost. So this absolute instance of fulfillment of the requirement of an invariant is hypostasized in the metaphysical entity, the substance. This is the mistake of the Aristotelian position. The substance is not an entity that remains invariant in contrast to changes. The substance consists rather in the procedure of taking as invariant a certain moment of thinking from the series of changes. It is an action and not a thing. The distinction between the variant and invariant is always relative as long as something is taken to be invariant only by virtue of articulating certain determinations at a certain stage. The substance is not a metaphysical entity, but a way of establishing a relationship, a logical condition. This is the first logical condition to establish the whole system required by the very concept of nature. As pointed out, the very establishment of nature demands to assume this stage of invariance as a logical requirement. But this demand must remain as a requirement. It may vary what is considered invariable. Only the requirement remains. It must remain as a logical requirement of thinking. The substance will be the requirement of thinking of establishing an invariant to put in relation the quantitative and quantitative series. The leading thread of the task is the definition of thinking as correlation. Relating is the most proper task of thinking. To think is to relate. The general functions will always be to distinguish and to relate what was distinguished. The second moment, so the first moment was the substance, the second moment will be consistent in the generation of an act that allows each term of the series to be ordered in the relation among themselves. The quantity and quality levels show the series with ordered members, x1, x2, y1, y2. Now, the series x1, x2 must be able to be connected to the series y1, y2, so that a unitary system can be generated between the two heterogeneous. So as to put it, we have two series. Now we have to show how to put this series in relation among each other. The question that must be answered is how the indexes, so this index is here, 1 and 1, can be connected when they belong to different series. So if I have different type of series, how can I make connections among them? According to Natorp, the way to connect them is time. Time will be the form that allows the series to ordering and thus the ordering of events. The series formed by the level of quantity and quality have an internal order. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it is necessary to connect the series with another in search of the total order. The first step will require the possibility of establishing a link between each member of the series with the member of the other. The member of the series of X must be able to be posited in relation to the members of the series in the Y. An order must be arranged that articulates x1, x2, x3 with y1, y2, y3, etc., so that each first member of one series is connected to the first member of the other. Time will be the universal scale that allows this arrangement. In every moment of time, well, I will not develop the specific way in which it is accomplished, but let's say that time is not anymore, as it was for Kant, a form of intuition, but now it is the way in which thought articulates series of order. And space, according to Natorp, will be the order of the successive, because it will be what allows us to distinguish what is at the same time. So now space and time are not anymore forms of intuition, but the production of thought in the seek of a total unity of order. So the expansion of this simultaneous generates, according to Natorp, the spatial places. So space and time together enable an order that puts the series in a common system. Space and time are specifications of the function of thinking as correlation. They are functions of thinking, or more precisely, functions of the relation. The moment establishes the relation between the instance and the place of space. The movement will allow coordinating the space points with the time points. In this way, it is established a system of variance and invariance. Time and space are connected in the concept of moment. For the reason, moment expresses the basic form of change in nature. The variant will be always in relation to what is considered to be permanent. And conversely, everything permanent will be always refer to something that varies. Each moment necessarily demands the other. Change can only be understood in relation to permanence and vice versa. That something changes implies that there is also something that remains the same in relation to what changes. This is the relation between the substance and its actions. It is the product of the logical requirements of thinking, relationship between the variant and what varies. Time could allow an order between series. The task of the function of causality now is to gather the moments that were considered at first independently. In this level, the relationship of change from the moment 1 to the moment 2 is indicated. The final goal is ordering a total system. The complete determination of the object, it is a task for thinking, something that may achieve and not a datum. So, intuition is overcome in two senses. On the one hand, space and time are not forms of intuition, but functions of thinking. On the other hand, the complete determined singularity is a task for thinking and not a datum. So, in the conduction of the categories, because I developed a little bit of the relationship, Natorp develops it a bit longer, but independently of the details, in the deduction of category, Natorp shows how thinking can, by its own means, construct objectivity in its concreteness. The concepts do not need anything given. On the contrary, the deduction of categories exhibits how thinking is capable of producing the object without any reference to intuition. And as I explained, without reference to intuition in two senses, on the sense that it does not need space and time as a form of sensibility, and the sense that it does not need matter as something given. For Natorp, thinking is the source of the totality of the determinations of the object. It provides the multiplicity and the unity. In the deduction of quantity and quality, it was exhibited how the act of thinking can concomitantly generate both unity and multiplicity. In this way, it was proven that thinking can constitute the object without any reference to intuition. As we exhibited, this construction was developed in these 4 levels: quantity and quality, relation, and I left as high modality. In this way, Natorp explains how thinking can constitute the object of experience. In this way, it can overcome the dualism between intuition and conceptual representation, as it was exhibited that there is no gap between the rules of objectivity and the concreteness of the object. This is the clue. So to put it briefly, if we start with the first question that we put, we start with this question. The question was, on what foundation rests the relationship of what we call representation with the object? According to Kant, the answer was to explain how can thinking be related to something external to itself, and that is intuition. Space and time as a form of intuition, and the concreteness of the object that is given. According to Natorp, on the contrary, to answer this question is to explain not how thinking can relate to something external to itself, but to show by the deduction of categories how thinking can construct the object in its concreteness and in its singularity. And according to Natorp, as I said, this is the only way to accomplish a genuine idealism with no reference to anything given. So that is all, and I am open to question if you have any.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question about the understanding of thinking as the type of construction, the object. As I understand, in Natorp philosophy, thinking is not the construction but the function of how the objectivity is becoming given as the object as intuition. And that is how Natorp comes to understanding what the intuition is. It's not the space and time in Kant's understanding, but something that is given as the result of our conception, the reception of this process, and that is what gives him the opportunity to construct this mathematical model. Yes, that has the possibility to connect this series, yes, in this dynamical kind of correlation. But my question is how we can imply this model to the psychology that is the main problem for Natorp. That is like 2 different poles of understanding. Is it possible or not? Thank you.
Okay, so first, thank you very much for a question. It's a very interesting one. So my answer would be like twofold. On the one hand, in relation to the general problem, and then specifically to the question of psychology. In relation to this general problem, it is interesting how this approach, in my opinion, and in opinion to many scholars, implies switching the point of view a little bit. On the one hand, switching the point of view of what is the understanding in general. Because according to Kant, the understanding is the finite understanding. It's very clear within the Kantian conception, when the Kant is talking about the cognitive subject, he's talking about a concrete finite subjectivity. It's very clear for the very beginning of the critique, what Kant says in the very beginning of the critique, in the Transcendental Aesthetic, Kant says, for us, human beings, for finite beings, for us, something given is necessary. So the moment of the given to intuition is required for us as finite beings. We need something to be affected. You know, this is the way in which the the transcendental aesthetic begins. So as to get cognitions, the human finite understanding requires, so the human psyche, so as to put it, requires something given. The Natorp's conception seems to switch a little bit or to redefine the notion of and the notion of cognitive subject, so as to put it, in the sense that the knowledge does not require anything given, because we are not talking anymore in the process of knowing of the concrete subjectivity. We're not talking about Laura, about Anna, about Juan, about John, about a singularity who is knowing, about the individual who knows, but a more, let's say, impersonal subjectivity which knows. So let's say one knows and not Laura, not Pedro. So let's say that Natorp detached the person of knowledge from the finitude of being. So this is the first part of the answer, in the sense that when we talk about the mind or the process of knowing of the subject, Natorp seems to be talking not of the finite subject, but of the process of knowledge itself. So at a certain point, it is detached from the concreteness of the ego on the one hand. On the second hand, and more precisely to talk about psychology, in this sense, Natorp also separates the point of view of the objectivity of knowing and the problem of how we generate representations. And as another topic, how can we have access to ourselves as an object of knowledge? So, as to put it very briefly, on the one hand, we have a switch from the point of view, in my opinion, of who is the cognitive subject. According to Kant, it's the finite human beings. According to Natorp and for neocantianism, it is a more impersonal subjectivity. So this is for the problem of knowledge. And the problem of psychology, more specifically, according to Natorp, it is like, let's say, another topic, in the sense that now it's not anymore the process of knowing experience, but something different, like knowing ourselves, for example. I don't know if that answered to your question.
Yes, thank you for your answer. Евгения,
Yes, thank you so much. Oh, okay, so thank you so much for your report. And I had a question concerning Natorp's interpretation, because you referred to his special attention to relation and thinking as relating. But I wonder whether he was paying also attention to the modality as another important category of Kant, which basically could connect, in my opinion, intuition and concept as the issue of accepting something as existing or non-existing, or necessary or possible or contingent, basically refers to this intuition of givenness or non-givenness. So maybe I just didn't understand quite well, but maybe you could comment on it. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for your question. Yes, absolutely, you are totally right. In fact, I didn't develop it in here just for a question of time. But, okay. But as you see here in the pedals, in 4 levels: quantity, quality, relation, and also certainly modality. So I didn't develop it here because I didn't have time, but certainly modality is a clue to understanding the problem in very different senses. One, because as you said, according to Kant, truth existence is defined in terms not only as something given, but also as a problem of modality. No, something possible as a form, what is related to the form of intuition, something which is existent and is related to what is given. So certainly, to understand what is the concrete subjectivity, or what is the reference to individual as what exists, it is a clue modality. I didn't develop it in here just because I didn't have time, but I would say that while this is a very it's one of the most relevant places where the difference between Kant and Natorp can be said in different ways. On the one hand, because according to Kant, in a very interesting way, what exists is not only the individual. And here it's very interesting to establish the contrast not only between Kant and Natorp, but also between Kant and the other tradition, the rationalistic tradition, because according to Baumgarten, for instance, according to Leibniz also, the individual was the existence. To exist was to be singularly and omnibly determined. However, Kant switches at certain point this interpretation. To exist is not necessarily to be completely determined. In my opinion, here we have another problem, but it's more related with the past and also with the future. That is that, in my opinion, Kant deals with two considerations, because Kant defines the individuality as what is completely determined too. So Kant, in my opinion, is dealing with his inheritance from Baumgarten and from the Leibnizian tradition, where the individual, the existence was the individuality, and his own definition of existence. That is not what is given the individual, but the connection with the lawfulness of material experience. So my answer would be, Kant has a revolutionary conception of the notion of experience, detached at certain point of the notion of individuality. That is true. For this reason, also for Kant, individuality and the complete omnimodal determination is an idea of reason and not on given at certain point. So here we have a very revolutionary conception of Kant in contrast to the past. But also for Natorp, and now Natorp in relation to Kant, has a very revolutionary conception in the sense that, according to Natorp, the distinction is not anymore between the relationship of the forms of intuition and something given. Because according to Kant, it is true that it has a novelty conception in contrast to Baumgarten, in contrast to Leibniz, but it's also true that the definition of existence to Kant, also in modality, is relation to something external to thinking. And in this way, it's the way in which Kant detaches possibility from reality. While possibility, you have the connection with form of intuition, or the forms of thinking and forms of sensibility. The reality is related to the material conditions which are given at a certain point, cannot be created by the forms. According to Natorp, now this existence is also developed in stages, as this every time determining more the objects, but now it is not related to something external. So as to put it very briefly, Kant has, in the concept of modality in relation to the existence and individuality, Kant has a very novelty conception in relation to Baumgarten, in the sense that now the existence is related to the forms of the laws of the given, of the law of experience. However, now Natorp has also, let's say, a novelty conception in relation to Kant, because now it's thinking itself that has to produce the lawfulness, and it's not dependent on something given. I don't know if my answer, I'm sorry, but I get very enthusiastic about these issues, and I don't know if I'm talking too much, so you stop me. I don't know if it's clear, my answer.
Well, I guess it's quite clear, even though it's given not so much in detailed form, but I think this is a very interesting issue, and there is still this issue of individuality a bit problematic for me to comprehend, whether sometimes when you read Kant, well, I personally have an impression that it's a certain species, but given as one logical representative of species, and not the experienced individuality as such. So it has like nothing to do with our perception, if I understand it right. So, but in any case, thank you so much. It's very interesting to think over.
Yes, absolutely. Just to make a quick note on it, because I get very enthusiastic about the topic, I totally agree with you. I think, and also it could be even more complicated, because according to Kant, in my opinion, we have two notions of singularity. One, in relation to intuition, so as to put it, but also in relation to ideas, no, because the omnimodal, the complete determination, is an idea of reason for Kant. So we have these two stages here. In my opinion, but maybe a brief note, one of the clues of the problem is on the concept of determination. Because to be completely determined individual, according to Kant, according to Baumgarten, according to Leibniz, is related to the concept of predicates, of nodes. That is to be completely determined. And also to the concept of realities, to have all the realities, to have all the predicates involved. According to Natorp, it's not anymore the determination expressed in relation to the concept of predicates, in the concept of determinations, but on the concept of laws. To have all the laws that determine the object. So in my opinion, this is also a very relevant place to seek. No, so what are we talking about when we talk about the singularity of the object? Are we talking about this object in front of me? Are we talking about the object of science? Are we talking about, so which kind of objects? And we talk about the complete determination. What are determinations? Predicates, realities, laws, and so on. But it's true I didn't develop it in here, but just because of the question on time. I'm sorry, but I get very enthusiastic about decision. I like it very, very much. So thank you very much for an interesting question.
Thank you, Laura. We have the questions from auditories.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for this really emotional speech. It was great. It was cool to hear. And I have a question, if it's possible to put the slides on the first, at the beginning of the introduction, if it's possible, because I, of course, don't remember what was
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I
For
have
the
a question.
introduction.
Yeah, the beginning of the introduction. Well, actually, I'm so sorry in advance if you answered the question during your speech, but I just maybe didn't get it. So you started the introduction, yes, that's over here. And you actually highlight the question on what foundation rests the relationship of what we call representation in us with the object. And all of the answers, if I'm not mistaken, were according to Kant's point of view. But if you would answer the question, this, just up to you, how would you answer that? Maybe even in 1 or 2 sentences, like for general people to get the idea.
Okay, so I think that Natorp is right, that let's put the problem first very briefly. The problem is, if we have a representation, that is to say, a horse, whatever you have, or a universal, how can I know that this is related to something given, that is something real? In my opinion, the Kantian solution is uncertain, and Natorp is right, that we have to show how the thinking, how the laws that we have can construct the object in its singularity. How can we have a system of laws that say this object and not any other, so that we can guarantee that we have an object in here. So as to put it in another way, I say this bottle is blue. So I have my law, my statement, the bottle is blue, and the object in here. The problem is, how can I guarantee that the relationship is certain? And in my opinion, Natorp is right. What I have to do is to create a system of laws that enables me to guarantee that I can construct certain kind of objects. That would be my answer. I think that the neo-Kantian position is right, that what I cannot do is to, first of all, what I cannot do is to focus on the subjective process. I cannot focus on what the mind or what the brain is doing. What I have to do is try to explain which laws are at the ground of my statement. So I have to put it very, 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 very extremely briefly.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes. So my name is Sophia, and I would ask. Thank you for your report. I would ask about the understanding of.
I am not listening. Because I'm sorry, because I'm with the phone, because I don't know why I cannot computer.
Yes, I think it's better. So I would ask about understanding of intuition. And,
Okay. Kant has two ways of, so in general, the concept of intuition, Kant gives two
maybe
main
emotional.
determinations. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm not listening properly.
Okay, I will repeat. Kant says that the process of thinking is active, but the intuition is passive and maybe emotional. According to Natorp, the question is according to Natorp, can we suppose that intuition, in his understanding, in Natorp's understanding, is active because there should be difference in their understanding, or maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're totally right. But so as to put it more, I don't know if not technically, but to put it like, I think in other terms, would say like intuition is the goal of thinking. So while Kant gives two, according to Kant, intuition is immediate and of singularity. According to Natorp, to reach this is the task, an infinite task of thinking. So it is not, I would say, that intuition is active, but that there is no gap between intuition and thinking. That the only thing we have is thinking, and the goal towards which thinking aspires is intuition, the intuitive moment.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't say that is intuition itself active, but that thinking is, that intuition is more like a role or the goal towards which thinking aspires.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much.
But your question is very interesting to see also how Natorp gives a role to the intuitive moment too.
So we have some other questions, our online colleagues. Okay, then Laura, thank you very much for really significant and emotional report. It was a great pleasure to hear you, to get this information. We have a lot of material to think about. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Thank you. So I think we can turn off. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know, are you listening to me properly? Because I'm not listening to you.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation, and you can write me at any time. Really, thank you very much. So you can write me at any time if you want to share any information, if you need any paper, you can write me whenever you want, and thank you for the invitation for all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
No,
Have a
thank you,
nice
all of you,
day.
and you can write me anytime you want for everything you need.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.